Hey Travis, good to be here. Hello everyone. Travis, I don't know if you are mute or if it's your audio, but we're still waiting for our host, Travis from Let's Talk Joby, to join.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear, Travis.
There
Good
we go.
morning, warm welcome to California.
Yes, hello to everybody. Good to have a couple people in here. Some I don't know if joined our previous spaces or not, but yeah, looking forward to discussing the call, which was positive, and I think the reaction to it says such. But yeah, excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And Travis, let's kick off with the overall outlook. Yesterday's shareholder letter, Q4 call with Joby. I mean, it did take some time after the call when we had our chat to really understand what had been said. There was no big bang, there were no big numbers. So, what's the overall outlook and your impression from that call?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was most important was they solidified some very key things that had just been out there in the atmosphere of the sector and things that have been said, from other companies. And I think that they leaned into addressing, not by name, but specific things, whether it be around defense and just things that I don't think that the larger audience somehow, sometimes, I think we joke how far down the rabbit hole we are after, all these years. But Joby has now two planes, but one that's been flying there for, since 2023. And that relationship's been for 8 years that Jobin highlighted on the call. So, again, things like defense, how much cash they have. They have 1.4 because Toyota, the 500 from Toyota still hasn't come in. They're already at 95% for their composite parts to be conforming. We talked about this offline. I think it's really important. Q3 2024 shareholder letter, it was in the 30s. So it's a 3X. And maybe we can go into in a little bit what that actually means more than just numbers and parts, because something has to make those parts. But yeah, a lot of exciting things that really solidify where the business is, where it's headed. Obviously, maybe a little bit slower ramp into Dubai and commercial operations with the end of 2025, early 2026 verbiage that they use now. But as I said a few times, I think, wish it was a little faster. It's maybe going to be a little bit slower, maybe another year or 6 months for more of the juicy action. But otherwise, I think a really good call. And again, Joby sometimes doesn't get the love, in that sense, market wise. Not that I look at the day to day, so much, but the stock is reacting, much more positively than it has over even big news in the past. So hopefully more people are realizing.
Yeah, and before we jump into the details of certification, because I think that was a key point yesterday that was not straightforward to understand, just recapping the highlights here. So, good progress on the certification progress, 5 aircraft now in flight test fleet, 2 delivered to Edwards Air Force Base, the successful demonstration of flights in Korea, the first vertiport in Dubai under construction, and first passenger operations is targeted for Q4 25 or Q1 26, and about 933 million cash in the bank at a burn rate of 500 million, pretty much funded for the next 2 years. And diving into the certification, I think that was quite an amazing progress yesterday, even though it didn't sound like you just mentioned that 35% FAA conform production in 24, and now they've moved that to 95%. Travis, could you dive in and explain to the listeners a bit more what that actually means?
Sure. So in the Q3 2024 report, they mentioned that the pilot production plant that's in Marina was producing in the 30%, I believe it was 35% of conforming parts. So now what they've said in the shareholder letter from yesterday was that 95% of the composite parts are now conforming. So a couple things. Composite is just some of the components that make up the aircraft, but Joby's already been FAA testing some of the electronics like the flight control computer, etc. And Didier mentioned on the call that that's really what they're going to lean into further now, is just making everything conforming this year. The past year was more just to make enough parts for a plane per month, as they highlighted as well. But for the certification, what this means at 95% conforming. And they also highlighted that others in the sector don't have this, yet they talk about they have products that may be conforming or look to be conforming. And that doesn't mean that they just make a thing that has the same specs that's in the SVAR, for instance. When Joby is saying conforming, they expect that to pass and is passing to what the requirements and demands of those components are from the FAA. So in order for Joby to say that they have 95% conforming composite parts, that means that the line that those are coming off of is conforming. And that's something that's sometimes lost in the minutia about certification. It's not just about the plane. It's also about the manufacturing line. Both, again, certification is an expensive piece of paper if you cannot manufacture, it's obviously extremely strict requirements. That's why when you see lots of photos and videos from inside Joby's factory, you don't always see that from others maybe in the space. But all of, the Joby team that's in there, also there's Toyota members that are in there, they're all in smocks, it looks like a laboratory. That's because it's a clean space. When I visited the factory, you have to walk into a threshold that like closes an airlock and then you step in. This is a very sophisticated, it's the machine that makes the machine. But anyway, that nuance about conforming, when Joby says that, we have to remember that means their line is good to go. So once certification happens, we're already in a great spot.
Just to add, so this does not mean for any other eVTOL competitor that you just look up the specs and that you produce alongside it. It means you have to have the processes in place. You also have to have the testing from the FAA. So there is a lot more to it. And of course, this also means that it's taking longer. Could you just add a bit of context, Travis? When was the last aircraft type certified beforehand?
Yeah, that's kind of the crazy part about this whole story is the last time that we had a new type of aircraft certified is the helicopter, and that was 80 plus years ago. So this isn't just an electric helicopter. Obviously, it's funny that that's sometimes what it's referred to as, but this is something that hasn't been done in quite some time. And so, I think part of also the difficulty that some might find, this is why it's really important that Joby's been around for 15 years. They have been through a lot of processes that just, you can't shortcut time. And, that's something where I think Joby is going to really start to be ahead of everybody. I think it's pretty clear, but maybe not clear to the broader audience.
Yeah, and I think yesterday what was surprising, yes, they didn't mention any numbers. They still kept quite a tight book on the ramping up of production. So we still don't know how quickly they can ramp up. But Joby was quite clear in their statements on the discussion versus Archer and Stellantis against Joby and Toyota.
Yes, there was a comment from Joe Ben, who obviously he has a special relationship with the team at Toyota because, they've been the partners with him from the beginning to help fund his dream and been a crucial piece, not just with capital, but obviously the engineering and manufacturing prowess. Toyota's the best in the world. Toyota makes roughly 10 million vehicles, obviously not airplanes, but vehicles per year, 10 million. And Stellantis makes a little over 1 million. And I believe that, aren't to keep me honest, but the market caps between the two, Toyota's roughly 240 billion, and that's 7x of what Stellantis is, a little under 40.
Yeah, and on top of that, Toyota has 32 production sites, locations in North America. They've already provided a huge amount of human support, engineers on site, which you experience hands-on visiting Joby. So even though it is a long haul, it's not easy. And yes, things are slightly delayed. For me, one of the key findings yesterday was, yes, not ideal. Of course, one would wish for faster and quicker go to market. But as long as this, of course, applies to everybody else competing, it is highly likely that Joby will cross the finishing line first. And then, of course, once that certification has happened, it will all be about the commercial partnerships, where Joby is aiming for a hybrid model, meaning that they will, in the US, for example, go on fully vertically integrated, meaning that Joby will operate the planes, whereas in Dubai, for example, they might take an OEM approach, as they mentioned yesterday. So having a third party operating the planes on site. But for now, it looks very highly likely that Joby is going to be the first of crossing the finishing line, and that they have a good setup on the commercial side, but also on the production side, to then scale up. Because as we've seen, anybody following the Tesla story, building the prototype was one thing, but then scaling up production, that's where it gets very, very tough again. Huh?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they'll definitely, in hindsight, once we go through this story, will be some big similarities to the EV stories that, Tesla has been driving. But I think what's also, something that is going to be really key, you touched on earlier, but just to look at the bigger picture, there might be a little bit of, I don't even want to call it a delay, just a realignment of the timelines to kind of, wordsmith it. But in the end, Joby is capitalized already today to, if you, extrapolate out the numbers. So for 2024, they finished the year at roughly like 400, between 440 and 470 on the burn. And for 25, they're guiding for 500 to 540. It's about 15% more. So even if you took that out again, so 15% for 2026, that puts you obviously a little bit over 600 to 600 and a half. And with that, Joby with 1.4 in the bank could still cover the 1.2 difference. So Joby's capitalized for more than 2 years at their current burn. And what we can already see from the roadmap that they have laid out, that what is going to happen, not in 2 years, but over the next year. Remember, the broad number that they gave us was 12 months for TIA flight testing, which is the final stage of certification. There's a very clear roadmap for me. And then, the other pieces about what the defense line is going to, turn into. A lot of people are asking maybe others out there in the space about defense and what the opportunity is. And some others, even said they miscalculated, I think was the word that they used. But for Joby, I think it's a different story. They were very coy again, but flexing their muscles. They've already flown the only hybrid eVTOL. I flew it for 550 miles multiple times.
Yeah, they have
I
also
watched
flown
those
high
flights.
altitude. So there was a bit of a question of Archer being ahead with the US Air Force testing. And that was put off quite bluntly yesterday with Joby saying, we've been flying already at Air Force Base now for such a long time that there are so many different programs within the Department of Defense in the US that there is enough room also for two companies. And overall sentiment in the US with the administration, with the new administration now in, of course, there were some questions on the Doge Elon Musk efforts, if they might have an impact on the FAA because people are being laid off. That was at least not raised or confirmed as a concern for Joby yesterday. And they did say that the new interest in US leadership in terms of innovation in the airspace aircraft industry, that is definitely something positive for Joby at this moment in time. Travis, can you confirm or add anything to this?
Yeah, I think just a couple things to kind of bridge the gap on what we were talking about there a second ago for the hydrogen variant. Paul addressed that Agility Prime was kind of shifting gears and transitioning the focus of that program from the government. It came alongside the Doge question, but again, that Joby, where Agility Prime is going, Joby is already there. DoD was not just Agility Prime. They've said they're working with all branches. Paul highlighted the Marines yesterday, which was interesting. But working at Edwards, a little bit further down the coast, that wouldn't be surprising for us over here in California. But I think so. Those couple things were really important to highlight. And then also in terms of from the FAA, leaning in or timelines, or if they were going to have the staff support this. Paul said that he actually thought that the FAA was leaning in more. They've gotten further now into the TIA process, and I just saw a tweet this morning or a post from Sean Duffy, the Secretary for Transportation, and talking about they're going to be hiring more people in the FAA, not just air traffic controllers, but safety inspectors, et cetera, which could only help our cause. So yeah, I think a lot of positive, news on that front. Doge will not, the chainsaw will hopefully not come to Joby.
Yeah, and just to put a disclaimer in here, I have sold my Joby warrants actually because looking and listening to the details of the certification progress, it seems to be rather black and white. So the warrants, there are Joby warrants out there, or Joby W, and they're valid until August 2026. And it looks like this is not a linear process, that one day we will just wake up and there will be the announcement, certification done, and go to market is next.
Yes. And in terms of maybe just to clarify also, you sold your warrants, but that was a small position compared to your, the shares that are held. So it's important to, I think, highlight the realistic piece of there's Joby, the company, and then, Joby, the day-to-day stock that people are maybe chasing or whatever the case might be. We've always not really focused on that piece as much, obviously crucial. But this is about the larger story. So there might be some immediate short-term, pushes of timelines, but again, nothing that was necessarily Joby, something's wrong or whatever the case might be. It's just that the process, as you said, is not linear. We will wake up and we won't have known that when we wake up that's the day that certification happened. I have a feeling it'll be an event that's planned, but I think it's going to be something that surprises. And what's most hopeful is that certification, you can't count your eggs before they hatch, but it seems highly probable that that's the path that we're on. And once that happens, the manufacturing line, as Didier talked about, as they're making the airplanes that keep rolling off, hopefully we'll hear more about November 545 Juliet X-ray, the one that has the registration, but hasn't been unveiled. But he said each one of the planes is going to be more and more conforming, meaning that by the time that they get to certification, all the parts that they'll have will already be conforming. And then to put the airplanes together is the last piece of the puzzle. So in terms of the scale at the beginning, I'm actually hopeful that they'll be able to ramp that probably quicker than people think. Because the day that they receive certification is the day that they can start putting the planes together. And they already have all the parts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that'll be crucial.
Yeah, and just to quickly recap for those that have just joined the highlights from Joby's Q4 shareholder letter and call yesterday. Record certification progress, 5 aircraft in flight test now, with 2 delivered to Edwards Air Force Base. Successful demonstration of flights in Korea. The first vertiport in Dubai under construction, and targeted first passenger operations in Q4 this year or Q1 next year. 933 million in the bank, which gives them a burn rate of about 2 years. And now coming back to what we just discussed with the certification, obviously as shareholders for the modeling, once that milestone is achieved, then there's 2 things missing, and that will be the revenue of the aircraft which we will know once the target, that the passenger operations have started in Dubai, that will know per hour, per day, per week, how much is what's the kind of turnover and what's the margin in the actual operations. And once we've got that, then the turnout of okay, what's the ramp of production and of pilots, training, ground staff, aircraft controllers, and so on. That's pretty complex, but it will take some time until you have all the facts and figures that you can then model something into a price target for Joby.
Yeah, and I think, somebody did ask on the call, and, Jobin didn't say we don't know or anything. He just said too early. And I think that Joby kind of has some of the modeling out from Uber. That's something that they've touched on, previously. So it'll take a little bit for maybe the market to see what that is. But I have a feeling that Joby's probably, in a pretty good sweet spot of where they plan to model things out. But I do want to kind of highlight something about the certification process, just to kind of put a bow on it and what it means. So once we get through that, once we start to think about like what are the markets that gets stood up, if as the fleet is limited, no matter how quickly they ramp, it's not going to be they turn on the factory and there's 50 planes sitting there, right? So like how do they build their markets, et cetera? And something that I thought was really helpful as a clarification from Paul, because it's something that I have heard as a knock against Joby, that they were only going to just own and operate their planes and that they're missing out on selling them. Since obviously operating them, there's some benefits for revenue, but there's cost to that. And Paul highlighted that some markets will be vertically integrated, where commercial service is going to be key. And that's going to be in the US. And other markets, they'll do a sale and support or a lease model. And so I think also something really key is that Joby can sell planes if they want to. They can lease them. Either way, they're going to get the maintenance component. They're still going to get the software as a service component, because Elevate OS will have to be packaged with it. And so I think there's a lot more, and but there's a lot of revenue streams that Joby does have. Obviously, it'll take a little bit of time, certification, maybe more than we want. But from there, it really is just a race to build airplanes. And that's where I think they're really poised to obviously be in the lead right now and continue to be in that place.
Yeah, and just remind us, how many applications do they already have from their partner Delta Airlines?
Applications?
Yeah, from the pilots.
Oh, I think already from the Delta side, I'm not sure if that was explicitly spoken about, but they already have a cadre of hundreds of pilots that Bonnie said. So, that's way more airplanes that they'll have, probably for the first 2 years. So I think, pilots won't be an issue. It's really just going to be building these airplanes. Okay. And obviously we talked about Toyota. That's where that becomes a crucial benefit.
Yeah. Travis, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think the biggest thing is just for everyone to take a breather. This has been a long 60 plus days of waiting about news from Joby. But as you've highlighted, right, they delivered another plane to Edwards Air Force Base. Those that are paying attention notice that they're doing flight tests all the time at Marina. Edwards aircraft, the first one, is now also coming online that we've seen on radar, which is something that we haven't have. Dayton, they talked about, is going to be by mid-year producing parts. There was recently a piece from the local news about that. People were talking about, but let's really take a breather after this long, anxious period and realize Joby is still on track to do an amazing job by the end of 2025. They have a lot of upcoming announcements that I think, again, they were being very coy about, that we will hear over the next coming months. So, this is not going to be linear. Maybe it's a little bit slower. The stock price isn't going to fly to, high numbers that people are talking about, tomorrow. But my closing words will be what Paul said. And do you want long-term value versus short-term hype?
And
that's, I think, where we're at.
Yeah. Really nice final statement, Travis. Thanks for sharing your views and insights here. Thanks everyone for joining and supporting our channels. And good luck to all of us, and hope to see many of you in Q4 or Q1 in Dubai when we actually see this in operation. And until then, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yes, thanks everybody. Really appreciate you listen to us, and yeah, hopefully some good stuff coming up.